Well, welcome to Technology and Education. Today I'm Richard Smith.
And I'm Caroline Crawford, and we are coming to you from the University of Houston Clear Lake in Houston, Texas, USA.
Where we are talking about MOOCs and the possibility of using MOOCs in colleges as substitutes for regular face-to-face courses. And this has come up in California recently, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's kind of interesting. Some senator over there has come up with the brilliant idea that because the courses are not available as often as one might desire for the students
in colleges
at the higher education level, then the students who can't get into those courses can just take a MOOC in place of.
Sounds like a plan to me. You don't seem to. She doesn't seem
what are you talking about?
Doesn't seem too impressed.
So you're telling me that the students who may be least likely to be successful in the class should just take a MOOCs course. And I define least successful perhaps because they don't have the self-regulation ability within a face-to-face environment, much less an online environment.
Well, how do you know they don't have self-regulation?
I said may not have the ability to self-regulate their learning, much less their procedural components, much less the motivation to remain within a course towards completion.
Well, what I find interesting about this is...
I mean, if you're not signed up for the course early enough to get in the course, there might be a suggestion there, I haven't checked it out, but there might be a suggestion there that you're not motivated enough to get your happy self in the course in the first place, to register when the registration opportunity opened.
Yeah, that might be a sign, but what I still find interesting is that the assumption that because we now have something called a MOOC, which is a massive open online course which thousands upon thousands of students can attend, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 students can attend.
And the instructional design, depending upon the MOOC, is questionable.
Well, the assumption on the part of the senator who is thinking about this is that the instructional design of those courses is the equivalent of a face-to-face course.
Or a decent online course.
Or a decent online course, true. And right off the bat, sitting here in Houston, Texas, I can tell you, no, I think there's some problems with that assumption.
There are significant problems with those assumptions. First off, supposedly the student is supposed to be paying tuition, correct? For sitting in on any of these courses and obtaining credit?
Correct.
How is that money going to be dispersed? Especially, is it a MOOC offered by the same instructor who is teaching the classes, so they're learning the same information? How are they going to even maintain any question concerning quality standards?
I don't think that was even thought about. I think they just think the MOOCs...
Which is an issue with this lovely senator who hadn't even considered, oh, well, what about quality?
I think they think that the MOOCs just happened, but if you have...
Isn't that cute?
If you and I have taught and teach online courses, and when you get to about 15 students in an online course where there's a certain degree of interactivity...
It gets harried.
It gets very, very harried for the instructor, and although the students might not...
If the instructor is doing a good job,
yes.
If they are facilitating and communicating back and forth.
If the instructor has a lot of communication and interaction built into that course, then it's going to be very difficult to manage the course. And if you are evaluating what your students are doing on a regular basis, that also is not the easiest thing to do. It's not easy to do in a face-to-face course, and it's certainly not easy to do in an online course, because instead of providing verbal explanations of what the students have done, you have to sit there and type in your critiques, and you have to make certain that you're putting everything into grammatically correct English, whereas when you're in a class, there's a certain amount of leeway when you speak. So that, with a MOOC, when you have something that is that large with that many students, by far the largest amount of instruction tends to be direct instruction, and that instruction is usually provided by videos that the professor would make. And
we're still working under the assumption that the person teaching the course that the student couldn't get into is of the same quality as the MOOC environment.
Well, the assumption is that, well, there are two ways I see right at the start. One, the professor who is offering that course would take the time and energy to convert that course into a MOOC so that the content is identical, or that a course that already exists as a MOOC has been found to be equivalent of the course that the students cannot get into in their on campus.
Okay, so let's talk about, similar course structure, similar learning goal, instructional goals, similar objectives between the course that the students couldn't get into and this massive open online course environment. Even considering that, looking at it from an economic standpoint, looking at it from the Pareto effect, where the whole 80-20 rule, where 20% of the population basically controls everybody's economic component. Consider that
Suspicious person here, okay.
consider that within an instructional realm, where the instructor has, let's say, 100 people over whom they are reviewing, instructing, checking work, communicating back and forth. Make it easy, 100 people. Based upon the Pareto principle, the expectation is that 20% of that population, 20 people out of 100, will take an enormous amount of instructional time and energy and necessary support. So within a MOOC environment, expecting, and this is lowballing it, but expecting that 20 people out of 100 are going to take significant amount of time, effort, support to maintain motivation, to maintain self-regulation, to maintain understanding of just the basic knowledge base. That is not necessarily something that is going to be a viable option within a massive open online course environment, just based upon the concept of a massive open online course environment.
Well, it's going to be very difficult.
It's hard enough to do in a class of 20 people
Right,
or
it's-
30 people, where you know that there's anywhere from 4 to 6 people who are going to maintain a significant amount of your time and energy.
It's going to be very difficult to design that into a MOOC because there are all sorts of questions that students might have that might require some sort of individual answer. That's not going to happen when you have, let's say, 4,000 or 5,000 students in a MOOC. Let's say it's a MOOC that's just limited to these colleges out in California, so you might have 4,000 or 5,000 students. It's difficult to build that in. It's not saying that it's impossible, but it's difficult to, one, build it in, and two, build it in so that it operates effectively. And in fact, you and I just attended a session at the South by Southwest EDU conference where the professors are involved in building a distance education type course, which will react to students' needs on an individual basis. It's taken them years to work at this, and they're only at the first stages. So in that sense, I don't see the MOOCs providing the type of instruction that is needed by students, especially students who might be entering these MOOCs at the community college level.
Who may not already have all the knowledge
Right.
base necessary and appropriate. So where's the remediation that's occurring?
That's not going to be there. And so the students who are at the lowest end of the spectrum need the most amount of help, and yet that help is really difficult to provide via a MOOC. But you know what?
Well, let's consider
we have
also,
reached, we're not
because
gonna-
this will not most likely be successful, then there's going to be all this money thrown at it to try and fix the issue, when the issue is the whole environment of a massive open online course for people presented as a viable alternative to a face-to-face environment where you have the instructor input and support.
or a small online course with a small population of students. But in any event, guess what? We have to stop now because we're not going to solve this entire problem.
But it's an
right now.
interesting
It is
discussion
it's
that's
an inter-
occurring.
and it's a very
Of all the
interesting
silly
problem.
things to do.
I every time there's a new technology, people jump on it and say this is the solution to all problems. But that's time.
Every single time.
Every single time, but we're going to have to discuss
And it never
that.
is. Amazing.
We're going to have to discuss that at another issue of technology
me
and
off.
education today. I have to cut her off because she's so voluble and so knowledgeable. I just can't stop it.
Voluble, maybe, yeah.
So, for Technology and Education Today, I'm Richard Smith.
And I'm Caroline Crawford again. We are coming to you from the University of Houston Clear Lake in Houston, Texas, USA. Woo!